University, USA. Dr. Swarnavel Easwaran sir is a graduate of the Film and Television Institute of India and the University of Iowa. He is an accomplished filmmaker and his recent documentaries include Nagapattinam, Waves from the Deep 2018, Mock Memories at the Crossword 2016, Migrations of Islam 2014, and Unfinished Journey, A City in Transition 2012. He is currently a professor in film studios and media production in English and journalism departments at Michigan State University. And his research focuses on the history, theory, and production of documentaries and the specificity of Tamil cinema and its complex relationship with the Hollywood as well as popular Hindi films. His recent books are Manadamu Mandiyudanum, Parisal 2019, and Madras Studios Narrative Journal and Ideology in Tamil Cinema, Sage Publications 2015. His fiction features Catamaran 2019. A collaboration with the Tamil cinema's leading director Miskin is currently on the film festival circuit. We feel honored to have such a fantastic celebrity with us. Sir, you hardly need any introduction. You have made all of us proud by your distinguished work in numerous capacities. A man of distinctive vision and the fountainhead of illuminating ideas, an idol of knowledge and experience and inspiration to all of us. We welcome you, sir, to fulfill our.
Thank you. Hello. 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 You are able to listen to me, the sound?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. Momentarily it froze, So thank you. Thank you, doctors, Sree Vidhya, Poornima, and Priya and, all the respected people here and dear friends. I'm particularly thankful to Dr. Poornima for inviting me here and Sree Vidhya. Thank you. Okay. So today, I thought of, talking about, of course, Shakespeare and cinema, which some of you would be familiar, of course, with the literature of Shakespeare, but also, that I thought of talking about the intersections of Shakespeare with cinema. Also, I thought that, because it's very specific, the locale is, Namakal. So I also thought of, focusing, a little bit the later part, of my talk on Shakespeare and Tamil cinema. So I'll start with, Shakespeare and his, continuing influence on international cinema. And then, we'll segue into Shakespeare and Tamil cinema. So, as I said, thank you all, and it is wonderful to be here, with all of you. It is impossible, to think, of literature or great filmmakers or even great cinema without Shakespeare. As some of you might be aware, that Nasiruddin Shah, the great actor, who is now celebrating his 70th, birthday. He went on record, saying that almost all Indian films are, influenced one way or the other, directly or indirectly, by Shakespeare, and his plays. So it's important for us, a similar claim has been made by one of the film studies scholar, but with respect to, Mahabharata and Ramayana. Mishra, Vijay Mishra, one of our preeminent scholars, he has said that, all Hindi cinema, or for that matter, all Indian cinema, could be, argued to have been influenced, by Mahabharata or Ramayana, the great epics. So you can see, that how great epics and, a great playwright like Shakespeare, have their impact, have their influence, on cinema. So let us, because to talk about Shakespeare is just like, talk about a big ocean. So we have to necessarily focus on, some small drops in the ocean to retain our focus. So let me, briefly briefly talk about the influence of Shakespeare, another, equally great filmmaker. Many of us regard as, one of the greatest ever, Akira Kurosawa. Some of you might have heard his name. Some of you might have seen his films. So Kurosawa, was a Japanese filmmaker and who has been an influence on, many Indian filmmakers, including my friend Mishkin. And Kurosawa himself has adapted three of, Shakespeare's plays. Hamlet, he made into The Bad Sleep Well, which is a very kind of loose adaptation. Whereas his adaptation of Macbeth and King Lear, or worth talking about in this context, particularly when we talk about Shakespearean cinema. Even if The Bad Sleep Well has also got great interesting moments. The way Shakespeare has influenced, particularly Hamlet. How Shakespeare's Hamlet has influenced Kurosawa's The Bad Sleep Well. But here I want to focus on Macbeth and its Japanese version, The Throne of Blood, and King Lear and the Japanese version directed by Kurosawa by the name of Ran. Ran means chaos, big kind of, huge confusion, chaotic, chaos. So Macbeth, what Kurosawa does is he takes up the key events from Shakespeare and the key characters, by Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, but also then he looks for a form and also, improvises, plays around with the content to suit, his purposes of placing Macbeth in a, what was in the, medieval period, by Shakespeare. Here is transferred to a samurai period by Kurosawa. So there are remarkable moments, as many of you. I'm just talking about, the cinematic moments. That Shakespeare has this, element of Lady Macbeth, who has been the cause of, Macbeth, taking up the seat, after killing the king, and she is not able to wash her blood, post that murder. So Kurosawa was very inspired by that image, of the blood not being getting out of hand. And then you can see that, Kurosawa kind of, heightens those moments and plays with that because it's highly, a very cinematic moment, based on an image of, somebody washing their hand and the red blood not going away. So you have the color, you have the image. So Kurosawa plays with that in Throne of Blood, Lady Macbeth. Similarly, you can see that, Kurosawa is invested naturally in the forest moving, but that again is a very visual moment, in Shakespeare. So Kurosawa, plays with that, and Kurosawa also uses, fog and mist in a very beautiful way to see as if, the transitioning of the moment, that it is very magical, that it is moving at the same time it is not moving because you have the very natural fog and mist covering, and you can infer, that now they move closer. So it's a very magical moment. Also, it is, having many layers of which foreground the very anxious subconscious, of our main character, who is now suffering from guilt. So simultaneously, he's also pulled by his ambition, as it is moving, and then he wants to fight, and then delusionally becomes. Then finally, of course, Kurosawa marks his film as different from Shakespeare by these hundreds of arrows coming and hitting Macbeth figure. His name is Wazizu, in Japanese. And then we see Toshiro Mifune, the great actor playing that Wazizu, collapsing, was like almost fixed, was not able to move with all the heroes. Finally dies. and he falls to the ground. And then, Kurosawa does is, you have a layer, a screen of, fog and mist surrounding him, and then you have also all these people, all these barriers, people who are with him, who are against him, all these people are coming there and surrounding, encircling, looking at this man, who is collapsing and dying. And that moment is very important because, that moment is not there, in Shakespeare. In Shakespeare, with Duncan's end, things, you have the, the vintage Shakespearean plot of, people dying. And then there is a suggestion that, now it's a new dawn, it has taken a turn, it will have a new beginning. That is how it ends. But here, it's different. In Shakespeare, the pathos and the grim tragedy, of ambition and what it brings on, both the effect and the affect of ambition is there. And then, he's pointing to something, which will be in the future. But with Kurosawa, the ending is, he is creating a space not only for the characters within the diegesis, within the story, within the frame, but also for us as audience, outside the diegesis, to contemplate on, the very fact, the reality of violence and its meaninglessness. So there he brings in, that the element of, to meditate on that. There is a Buddhist element to that. So that can only come from the East, from Kurosawa. So that is one way, we can look at, the great adaptation of A Throne of Blood by the great master Kurosawa. Macbeth was also adapted by, many directors. Two others, who are very important as far as, cinema is concerned. Even very recently, there was a wonderful version, Macbeth. So continuously they are doing it. But I just want to mention two more, significant films directed by great masters. One is Orson Welles, who made Citizen Kane. Some of you who are interested in cinema would be aware of it. And then Roman Polanski. Both of them made their own versions, of Macbeth. Wells' Macbeth is more experimental, with his own kind of, authorial, signatures on it. Of course, it was also a project he struggled to complete because of many reasons, including the financial. Polanski's is, is within his own authorship, of looking for a form which is in his terrain, which is not too experimental like Orson Welles, but which is also like, not so much narratively focused as in the case of the classical Kurosawa. So if you have the time, those films are available. I would strongly encourage, students who are interested in Shakespeare to watch these three films. Adaptation of Macbeth by Akira Kurosawa, Orson Welles, and Roman Polanski. Now, let's briefly, talk about, think about, ponder about King Lear and its adaptation by Kurosawa called Ran, R-A-N. So Ran in Japanese means, chaos. So in King Lear, that you have King Lear, and then you have, Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia, his daughters. King Lear, many of you might be aware, was, very much attached to his last daughter, Cordelia. And therefore, before he wants to, share his kingdom with them, give it over to them by partitioning it, or, in whatever way he wants them to express, how much they love him. So there is that element of a certain sense of, a narcissistic kind of pride in him, as well as, that as an extension, that his own daughters will have to kind of write a hagiography about their own father. They have to praise him. And then, many of you might be aware that the first two daughters do that. They play to that kind of a tune, which their father is interested in listening to. So they praise him. He is vainglorious, and they say, that there is no happiness or joy equal to, loving you or caring for you, and it's hyperbolic. In Shakespeare's words, they sound very beautiful. And whereas Cordelia, says, "Yes, I love you as a father, but no more, no less." So that kind of shocks him. Um, I mean, in a bit of anger, and being overwhelmed by the moment, he kind of splits and shares his kingdom to his two daughters, and the third daughter, Cordelia, doesn't get anything. You can sense she was the most honest, but he is overwhelmed by his emotions, King Lear. So then there is the track that these two daughters will make him suffer, and he has a very tragic life, and King Lear ends as a very great, one of the greatest tragedies of Shakespeare, when finally when he relents, but by the time Cordelia has also had a very tough journey and dies, and then he too dies. So this is regarded as a masterpiece by Shakespeare, and when Kurosawa adapted it, because he's adapting it from Japan, so what he does is, the first thing he does is that he changes, he modifies these three daughters into three sons. And of course, he also draws, for his story, from a Japanese legend. And then he realized, that how it was very close, to King Lear's structure. So you have the three daughters who are three sons here in this, and King Lear goes through all this suffering. But Kurosawa also thinks of that if he suffers so much, there has to be a backstory, which is not there in Shakespeare. Kurosawa thinks of giving these characters a past, which again comes from the East. That we think of karma, isn't it? We think of that there has to be a cause effect relationship. So what Kurosawa does is that these two sons, the elder sons, they have their wives, and the elder son's wife, Lady Kay, she has a backstory where her family has been wronged, by this Itedora character, Ichimonji, clan, that is what is the clan called, So this main character, this King Lear, of Japan, he has wronged, her family. So she has a very strong reason, to avenge. So that is one very strong way, Kurosawa kind of introduces a certain backdrop, the backstory, which we can all relate. That he is making, what Shakespeare posited, like in the case of Scotland of Macbeth becomes medieval period or samurai period of Japan. Here in King Lear, what was Dutch country, here it becomes again a samurai past of Japan in Ron. So he is adapting from the West Shakespeare, here from Japan, and we are reading it from India. So for us, it will invoke stories of many characters we already know, like somebody like Kaikeyi, or Draupadi, who had reasons to avenge, isn't it? I mean, if you look at all the many stories surrounding this, these epics, this going back to why Vijay Mishra said, all films come through Mahabharata, Ramayana. So there you can see, how Shakespeare and these epics, merge together. When we look at it from our angle, as people who are receiving, this great art. And then the second daughter-in-law, that she has a brother, Surumaru, is a very important character. And Surumaru was blinded by this King Lear because of his apprehension, that one day, he should not somehow, come and usurp power. So she has also a reason, but she is not in the avenging mode. Rather, she becomes more and more spiritual. Like, she in a way accepts her fate and, gives a scroll painting of, Abhi the Buddha to her brother, is blind. So that, Buddha will remain, and guide him, So he carries that scroll painting with him, and he has, his own stick to guide him. So when the film ends, in the case of Shakespeare, you have the Shakespeare tragedy ending with, these many deaths. But here, Kurosawa does, yes, deaths are there. The last son dies. King Lear also dies. So those things are there. But then he ends, with this image of the Surumaru, who is now alone, having lost everybody, over a cliff, a mountain. And we see in a long shot on a mountain, the cross, which is like far distant because it's a long shot, but we can see him in silhouette, that, just walking with this, stick in his hand. And because he is blind, that there is a moment, Kurosawa creates with great detail and attention and focus, that there is a moment we feel, oh, he might even slip over and fall down. There's a moment where he hits a small rock near the cliff. And as he tries to balance himself, the scroll painting from his hand drops down. And as it drops down, you can see that, as it comes down through the mountain, then, it gets caught in one of the rocks there and it hangs there and it opens up. So we see Buddha hanging there, and watching this whole thing. So that is how the film ends. So it has become again, a very important, Eastern intervention. That in a way you could argue that he takes the film beyond, the narrative by giving it, a more universal kind of interpretation. Now you could interpret it in many which ways you want, with depth, with profundity. For instance, that if we think of, say, for example, that our own consumer culture, the way we are moving forward, consuming everything, not even caring for environment, we are, that Surumaru figure kind of, is a metaphor for that. We are not aware, of what is there, just very near us, the abyss where we can fall. So Kurosawa gives it a very dense kind of layer, in adaptation. But how to adapt the spirit of a great master, but also have your own, locus, highly punctuated, that you are coming from the East, it's a patrilinear society. It's not patrilinear. So you have the sons, but that is only the narrative part. Then you have also the spiritual dimension, the deeper layer in King Lear, as in, Throne of Blood. So this is what, makes adaptation interesting, because then it becomes a very original work that you are creating. It becomes a kind of, you start with translation, but then, you end up as a transcreation of the thing. It's less about the fidelity kind of discourse. It's less about remaining true in terms of events and characters to the original. It's more about, remaining true to the spirit, of the original text of Shakespeare in this case. So these are ways, we can think of, that Shakespeare and cinema. So it's a rich discourse. King Lear has also been made, by many important directors. Gregory Kozintsev, Russian director, has made Hamlet and King Lear. Those films are also available. So many masters are made. So I would strongly encourage students and scholars invested in Shakespeare, to look at these films, because they would not only give an insight into adaptation, but also, into the minds of the great masters, how they come from one particular socio-cultural backdrop and try to adapt Shakespeare. So, now, let us focus briefly on, Tamil cinema and Shakespeare. Um, if we look at the history of Shakespeare adaptations, as far as cinema is concerned, then Pamal Sambandha Mudaliyar becomes a key figure because he started Suguna Vilas Sabha, and then he used to have his own one small elite crowd who will come to watch his play, and he will have his own troupe playing. He was highly interested in plays. And then he adapted and he wrote, primarily kind of, was a playwright. So he adapted Shakespeare. He also wrote his own original plays, but he was essentially, one of his key authorial, impetus was translating Shakespeare. So he translated Amaladityan. That was the translation of Hamlet. So we do not have, that early, a version of Amaladityan, which had, was on screen. But then later he kind of, in Amaladityan, he remains true to the core of Shakespeare. But later he finds that, when he's staging it, that he has to take the Shakespeare and Hamlet to the masses. Then he writes Manohara. Including, great scholars I admire, like Theodore Bhaskaran sir, he has also written 4 years back. When 4 years back, when the 400th anniversary was there, 2016, that he also credits, Manohara to, Shakespeare's Hamlet, and he says that it is not acknowledged in the film. But today, when you look at it, Manohara is, not like Amaladityan, it is far removed, from Shakespeare's Hamlet in a way, because in Hamlet, the plot, that, it is about the father, wife, and father's brother, and father is killed. But here in Manohara, it's about father with a seductress, Vasanta Seni, played by T.R. Rajakumari. And there, Kalangir's dialogue is different because it is addressing his politics. Vasanta Seni is almost like the name sounds, from North India, almost like, we can argue, we can claim. And the story takes on another element, that how the son will come and, then he becomes a spokesperson for his mother. And then, it also provides the space for Thespian, Shivaji Ganeshan, to act out, his kind of penchants, for melodrama. His finesse, in terms of dialogue delivery, mouthing, the wonderful, florid, alliterative, dialogues of Kalangir Karnamidhi. So Manohara provides those kind of spaces. But prior to that, there was a Manohara, on screen, in which Pamal himself had acted, but we do not have the print version, unfortunately. And in that, historians like Bhaskaran sir have said that Satyamurthy played, the father's role in that version. So we have that, starting from there. But in terms of, a cinema which reached a lot of people in Tamil, Romeo Juliet becomes the key film, because it was 1937, Ambikabati, with the great MKT, the superstar, the first superstar of Tamil cinema, MKT, and Santana Lakshmi playing Romeo and Juliet, and Elisa Duncan, who was trained in University of Southern California here. Then he was there in India, and then he directed, that film. So that is also great, very interesting moments. It was supposed to be, it had love scenes which shocked the audience at the point of time, with MKT and Santanakshmi, sitting on the bed, and and for those days, it was very provocative. And Duncan, of course, brought his own finesse, from Hollywood. You can still see, that film is available for you to watch. And he also remains true to the sequences in Romeo and Juliet, particularly the iconic balcony sequence, where she's there and, Romeo is down, and, you can see those scenes. And also the brother of Ambikapati playing a messenger, so those Romeo Juliet, touches are there. So he draws from the original. Also, we have to remember, it was written by Ilangovan, one of the great screenwriters, dialogue writers of early Tamil cinema, who was also highly well read. So it was that kind of a combination in 1937 in Ambikapati. And then in 1940, Sirgalattu Sama, he made Merchant of Venice into Shylock. Unfortunately, we don't have the print, and not much is known about that film. Even when you browse through, browse for primary materials, it is not there. So we go to secondary materials like reviews in magazines, from the archive, but not much is available. And then, a very important director comes along. Ramnath, K. Ramnath, who directed, great films like Elai Padumbadu. Then in 1949, Ramnath makes 12th Night, Shakespeare's, 12th Night into Kanniyin Kadali. So Kanniyin Kadali, as the title itself indicates, Kanniyin Kadali. So it is a very important, film because, 12th Night is about impersonation, girl acting as a boy. So here, that you have these great actress, Madhuri Devi, almost playing three roles. That as is woman, but who is now impersonating, as a man. And then, this man, another Kanni is falling in love. So again, she's, so she has this wonderful, she was a, extraordinary actress. So Kanniyin Kadali was made by also this, somebody, we all respect a lot, particularly, somebody like me, K. Ramnath was an iconic figure, And then 2 years later, he will make Marma Yogi, 1951 with MGR, which again, scholars like Bhaskar Sir, the professor Ganesh Krishnamurthy, English professor, they all kind of, allude, to, the influence in Marmogi also, particularly Bhaskar talks about Shakespeare's influence. In Marmogi, again, you will find, it draws from Robin Hood, so many sources. But where Shakespeare perhaps, comes in, could be the moment where you have the ghost figure of the father, who has been, killed with the help of his seductors. So his ghost is haunting, and now he relents, the father figure. And so he is like haunting, through the film. So Marmayogi becomes important, And so, that for me, like my own reading would be, that if you look at Manohara as well as Marmayogi, this is, my argument that I would claim that Shakespeare has propelled special effects in Tamil cinema. Because in Manohara also you'll find, the father figure, but here it becomes, the lower figure, of this vamp. He haunts the film throughout. So they have to necessarily think of, what we call as special effects, which are effects done, in front of the camera inside the studio. Unlike say what we call as, EFX today, which is in post-production. These were special effects, done in front of the camera in the studios in those days. So that was one moment. In Manohara, that character till the end is there. That T.R. Rajkumari's, husband character, who, is looking for vendetta and vengeance. And the film also sets the whole thing up, in the beginning with him. So it's a very important track. Similarly, in Marmayogi, that you can see, the king, the invisible figure, as a ghost. So special effects, that one had to think of, through these things, in Tamil cinema. And when we come to, 1950s, we have Anbu, Manohara, and Rathatilagam. We spoke about Manohara in 1954. Let us talk about 1953, Anbu. So Anbu is an interesting film because Anbu is, see, when we talk about Ambikapati, we are talking about, certain moments, certain scenes, which are adapted, like the balcony scene. But in the case of Anbu, it is like a film within a film or a play within a film. A small sequence is staged from Othello. The moment he kind of, suspects Desdemona and kills her, that moment is staged. But Anbu also, as Professor Ganesh Krishnamurthy argues, inverts it because, here the suspicion is by the character played by Padmini, the wife, who suspects Shivaji Ganeshan to be having an affair with his stepmother, who is again played by T.R. Rajkumari, who played Vasanta Sena and Manohara. She was a top star in those days. So it inverts the idea of, what Iago will be, what Desdemona goes through, in Othello, through Othello, isn't it? Through Othello and Othello and Desdemona, equations are altered because it's not Othello suspecting Desdemona, but Desdemona suspecting Othello. But still, that is a nod to Shakespeare. Othello is staged in Anbu, and a similar thing happens, in Rathatilagam. Rathatilagam was in 1963, almost 10 years after Anbu, a decade after Anbu. In Rathatilagam, it is in the backdrop of Indo-Chinese War at that point of time, early 60s. So here, Shivaji Ganeshan, as Othello is suspecting, Desdemona, Savitri, and there is a sequence built into that. But it also becomes layered and thick because, he is also suspecting her of being a Chinese spy. And it has parallels, with Othello because he kills her and then relents him. Just as with Othello and Desdemona, a moment, overwhelmed with, feelings, overwhelmed by suspicion. So those parallels are there. But the imprints of, Shakespeare on Tamil cinema when we talk about that. And so we spoke about Marmayogi and Manohara Rathatilagam. So the very same year when Rathatilagam was made, 1963, you had a film called Arivali, with Shivaji Ganeshan and Bhanumati. But Arivali is an instance which is different from what we have been speaking about. See, we spoke about Ambikapati, where certain scenes are staged. The spirit or some of the theme or motifs of Shakespeare, the love motifs are transferred, translated. Whereas we saw a play within a film, or a film within a film, as we call it, staging of certain key sequences. In the case of Anbu, and in the case of Rathatilagam, Othello. But in the case of Arivali, it's about adapting the whole thing. What we generally kind of label when we say adaptation. It takes up Taming of the Shrew, which then becomes a trope in Tamil cinema. With MGR and Kamalas and Rajnikant, you can constantly see, that there is a modern urban woman in some of their, big commercial films I'm talking about, and then they tame her. And generally, in MGR film, you'll be a villager, Patika to Ponneya, the title, and then you'll be taming. So that becomes a trope, but the source, could be, seen to come, to be inspired by Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. Arivali kind of, remains true, to Shakespeare, both in terms of, the screenplay and in terms of, drawing from some of the dialogues, and also, remaining true to the events in terms of, plot progression. Arivali is again important in that kind of. Then finally, 1970s we come to, which is again 10 years say after Arivali, 1963, 1973, you have Rajapat Rangadurai, where Shivaji is playing, almost autobiographical film. It is that not in terms of his life, but in terms of that the biography of somebody who comes through boys' company, goes through various stage experiences, and now he's struggling. That kind of character, that kind of a fictional biography, but which could stand in for the stories of a lot of people who had this history from that angle, I'm saying. So there, Hamlet comes in again. Play within the film is the iconic to be or not to be. And Shivaji, it creates and allows that space for Shivaji to showcase, his histrionics. So at a very key moment, when almost everything is going down, that he cannot anymore sustain himself, as this actor, because everything is changing. More modernity is entering life. People are not watching. His kind of plays, which draws from folklore, what we call as notarial. So at that very crucial moment, as Professor Ganesh Krishnamurthy has also pointed out, it provides the play within the film of Hamlet to be or not to be, where he is at this moment, pondering about life and deeper philosophies, about his own indecisions. It's just, and that becomes the launch pad, so that later then he would be playing patriotic figures. The element of nationalism comes in, and he plays, goes on to play Kapalotia Tamilan and Bhagat Singh, and increasingly becomes successful. More and more people come to watch. So it becomes more a kind of anti-colonial nationalist from the colonial Shakespeare. So that's a very important invention that, as Krishnamurthy has pointed out. So that is how it progresses. Then Julius Caesar has also kind of sporadically kind of appeared in Tamil cinema, because Brutus is such a famous figure that even in a village they will understand. When you talk about Brutus, you're talking about betrayal, isn't it? So they have staged, in Swargam 1970, again with Shivaji, and Priya 1978, with Rajnikant and Sridevi. You have this, the Julius Caesar sequence, but that is not much related to the overall plot. But it has, it signifies, betrayal to that extent. They kind of borrowed and staged and inserted, you can say, into these films, which are mainly commercial films. And Baskin Saul also talks about film in 1959, Sollu Thambi Sollu, which was made from As You Like It, which when I browsed and see, I saw that when I browsed and saw, it had Prem Nazir and Rajas Lochana, playing the lead. We do not have the print, but it indicates, from a comedy, that how in a certain kind of romantic comedies, because it comes in 59, then you have in 64 Kadalika Neramile and all those kind of films. So Shakespeare certainly had his influence on Tamil cinema, mainly because as I pointed out when I began this discussion, that Nasiruddin Shah is not wrong. When the great Nasiruddin Shah is saying that Shakespeare has had a strong influence, we can certainly see in all these films. And more importantly, that many of the tropes of Tamil cinema owe a lot to Shakespeare. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I wanted to focus on the international, start with the macro, then come to the micro. I will end, my talk here. Then, if you have questions, I will address that in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Such a really wonderful comparison between cinema and Shakespeare. Really, we enjoyed it, sir. Thank you so much. Dear participants, if any queries, you can ask, sir.
I can see.
I think no more
Yeah.
queries, sir. I think no more queries, sir.
No, I can see in the chat that,
Yes, sir.
there is a interesting, many people have said very informative. We have a Omkara Hindi version of Othello and Nat Samrat, a Marathi version of King Lear, sir. Yes, that is Many of you might be aware, that in Hindi, that particularly, with Vishal Bharadwaj, Shakespeare has been energized. But he has made now a trilogy. Some of you might have seen Maqbool, which was an adaptation of Macbeth. Then you have Umkara, which was an adaptation of Othello, and then recently Hyder, which is an adaptation of Hamlet. I'm sure some of you might have seen or read about it, and these films are very important. He's a very, according to me, an extremely important director, contemporary director, Vishal Bharadwaj, and particularly his investment in literature, like his collaboration, with Pir Mohammad Bashir, in Hyder. Can see that how two great literary minds paying homage to Shakespeare, but also making the film their own in the context of Kashmiri backdrop. It's a very dense, thickly layered, and extraordinarily interesting film. Particularly as students of literature, you should all watch either. And Maqbool for me is an extremely important film, as an adaptation of Macbeth, because what Maqbool does is that not only see it's a great adaptation, but also it does something which Hindi cinema has not done. On the one hand, the stereotypical Muslim gangster is there, but then Vishal Bharadwaj goes beyond that. He goes into inside. He gives an insight into the interior, the domestic sphere, the domestic sphere of where that Muslim woman, played by Tabu, will be living, and then how she becomes a key figure as Lady Macbeth. So it's a wonderful portrayal by a great actress and a great director, great a thinking director, for times, who is highly invested in literature. That he's adapted Ruskin Bond. He has done 3 adaptations of Shakespeare. And those of you interested, that it has a lot of layers, and some wonderful scholarly articles are there. You can read. You can also watch the film. And Omkara is again, a special film when it comes to adaptation of Othello. You may all be knowing, Ajay Devgan, and also the Iago figure, Saif Ali Khan, and all these extraordinary ensemble of actors, wonderfully directed with the dialect, of the North Hindi belt. Vishal Bharadwaj comes from there, so there is a soul, in the way he kind of adapts. So they are remarkably interesting films. Not only that it has the technical finesse, but also he is himself a musician who gave music for Gulzar's film before making films. So you have that beautiful layer of music as well. So they are wonderful films. You must watch them. Nat Samrat is Marathi again, as the great tradition of theater and cinema, going back to so many people, including P.L. Deshpande, then the great Vijay Tendulkar, whom we all know a little bit, we all personally. So the classic example is the Shriram Kotwal. So you can see always adaptation of play which already came from folklore, then adapting it for cinema, by people like K. and Mani Kaul and Kamal Swaroop, the Shriram Kotwal was made into a film. So they have a big, rich lineage. Nat Samrat again is a wonderful adaptation. Okay. I appreciate that observation. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Any other queries? No,
Thank
sir.
you.
Okay.
I
Thank you,
see
sir.
that,
Thank you so much, sir.
I
Thank
see
you.
that
Sree
so
Vidhya,
many.
ma'am?
I see
Yes.
that so many of you have thanked me profoundly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I thank you. In equal measure or even more actually.
Especially Cynthia, ma'am. Sir, just to see this chat box, sir. Cynthia, ma'am from California.
Yes.
She sent her greetings to you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yes, yes. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay, Sree Vidhya, ma'am. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Then thanks a lot to all of you. If you have any questions, you can always email me. So thank you, Poornima. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, sir.
Thank
It's
you
my
all.
pleasure, sir. Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello.
Sree Vidhya, ma'am. Sir.
Audible?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. You're audible. One sir is trying to speak, ma'am.
Yes. Gratitude is a global sense of being thankful, and it's time to reciprocate the same. I'm deeply honored to be called upon to present the vote of thanks. Let me first thank the management of Trinity College for Women, Arts and Science, in particular, Honorable Connoisseur, the Chairman P.K. Sengodan, Honorable Connoisseur, Secretary K. Nalluswamy, Honorable Connoisseur and Principal Dr. M.R. Lakshmi Narayanan, Honorable Connoisseur, Academic Counselor Kalaimamani, Dr. Arasu Parameswaran, Honorable Connoisseur and Administrative Officer N.S. Sendilkumar. I thank you all for your extended support. I now thank the nodal officer and convener of this event, the Great Conference of Efforts, Ms. Poornima, Assistant Professor and HOD UG, Department of English, Trinity College for Women, for her great efforts. I thank today's keynote speaker, Dr. Swarnavel Ishwaran, Associate Professor, Department of English and School of Journalism, Michigan State University, East Lansing, USA. I thank you, sir. You took us back to that era belonging to the men of theatre, the great Shakespeare and the cinema legend Akira Kurosawa, and a connectivity to the classic Tamil movies. Thank you, sir. I thank you for your remarkable presentation throughout this session. You have proved to be accomplished despite being a down-to-earth personality. Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks for the knowledge you have shared with us. I now thank the whole dynamic team, the PG and Research Department of English, Trinity College for Women. I thank Ms. R. Priyadarshini, Assistant Professor of English, Trinity College for Women, who have introduced the chief guest with her powerful streams of words. I thank each and everyone who took part in this session to make it a successful one. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night ahead. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We shall wind up now.
Okay, ma'am.